Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. It's July 4th, and mentally healthy Americans all over the country are celebrating it like this. But Henry Winkler, the star of Happy Days, has a different idea. He says, "We are so divided as a country, only a cataclysmic event that makes us depend on one another again can bring us back together." And he also says the Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Let's take a look at that disaster since the Industrial Revolution which Henry Winkler was talking about. Life expectancy over the last 250 years has more than doubled. Odds are that if Henry Winkler lived 250 years ago, he wouldn't have made it out of his 30s. He looks pretty miserable now, and perhaps that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. The percentage of people who are undernourished in the world has been plummeting and is now at a record low. The percentage of the world population living in extreme poverty is down almost 90% from 200 years ago. And illiteracy is down about the same amount. The reality is that people now live longer, better, more comfortable lives than any time in human history. Henry Winkler calls all of this incredible progress since the Industrial Revolution as being a disaster for the human race. The reality is that people on the political left have a psychological need to believe that they're living through some sort of crisis, and preferably more than just one. In 1969, Paul Ehrlich was touted as being the world's leading expert on population. He said, "The trouble with almost all environmental problems is that by the time you have enough evidence to convince people, you're dead. We must realize that unless we are extremely lucky, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 20 years. And then in 1970, Ehrlich predicted that the oceans will be dead as Lake Erie in less than a decade, and that America will be subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. He said the time of famines is upon us and will be its worst and most disastrous by 1975. In 1969, Ehrlich, the United Nations, and the New York Times proposed poisoning the food and water supply of third-world nations in order to keep the population down. And in 1975, experts said that global cooling was going to kill us all, and they wanted to melt the Arctic ice cap by covering it with soot. President Carter and the New York Times said that the world was going to run out of oil by the year 2010. They told us in 1979 that nuclear power plants were going to melt all the way through the earth to China. In 1979, they told us that burning fossil fuels was going to melt the North Pole and cool the United States and Western Europe by 16 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1979, they told us that sulfuric acid was falling out of the clouds on top of our heads. What we see is frightening a lot of scientists, says George Henry, a researcher at Brookhaven National Laboratory. And then in 1981, the Chicago Tribune reported, climatologists now blame recurring droughts and floods on a global cooling trend that could trigger massive tragedies for mankind. And then in 1989, the United Nations told us that we only had until the year 2000 to save the world from global warming. They also told us around the same time that the ozone hole was going to destroy the ecosystem and give everybody skin cancer. And if the ozone hole didn't get you, then mad cow disease would. And if you survived all of those world-ending apocalypses, then Y2K was definitely going to bring you down. 245 years ago today, the founders of our country signed a document intended to liberate us. Every single one of those people who signed that document would now be classified by Democrats as being an insurrectionist and a terrorist. They would be constantly monitored by the National Security Agency and almost certainly be imprisoned. Washington, D.C. is named after and built around a set of monuments to people whom the Democrats would now classify as being terrorists. Democrats say they want to bring us together by calling us deplorable, knuckle-dragging racists and insurrectionists. They want to lock us in our homes, shut down our places of worship, and cover our faces. They've taken away our ability to hold free and fair elections and want to take away our First and Second Amendment rights. They demand that everybody believes their insane apocalypse theories along with all of their other junk science. They demand that men be allowed to compete in women's athletics and be able to use the same bathroom as little girls. They want us to come together simply by submitting to their insanity and their slavery. H.L. Mencken explained this over 100 years ago. He said, The urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it. Power is what all messiahs really seek, not the chance to serve. The Founding Fathers would be shocked and ashamed by the people who now occupy our nation's capital. Today would be a good day to read the Declaration of Independence and remember what our country is supposed to be all about. Toto has no interest in being a slave to anyone, particularly not insane people on the left. You can visit him, Kyrie, and Caesar on the web at realclimatescience.com.